All right, well, it is 7 o'clock, so we might as well get started. From my end, welcome from the library, Chelmsford Public Library. Some of you are Zooming in from other places in the country, I heard a rumor. So we welcome you all to the program. I'll introduce Jan, our fearless leader in this genealogy group, to do another introduction.
Head cook and bottle washer too. So welcome everybody. It's lovely to see such numbers of you gathered here tonight. You know of Kathy Kaldis perhaps from previous talks that she's presented for us in the past, and tonight is no exception. You know she is a professional genealogist and a genealogical speaker. She's also known as the Ancestor Finder, and I'd like to know more about that sometime. She holds a certificate in genealogical research from Boston University and has successfully completed many advanced level genealogical institute courses. Kathleen is very active within the genealogical community and serves in many leadership positions for many organizations. A proud member of the Lexington, Massachusetts DAR and the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. Her areas of genealogical expertise are New England and the Atlantic, Canadian provinces, lineage research, forensic research, Greek research, and mariners who sail the seas, and resolving through genealogical problems. Please welcome Kathy Kaldis.
Thank you so much. Let's see, let me just get the PowerPoint going here. So I actually am so happy that you're able to be here tonight. This is the inaugural showing of this lecture, and this has been a lecture that I've been wanting to really present for a long time. It's based off of a book from the 1980s, and I still have here my yellowed copy that I read back in 1987. And it's all about cultural literacy and how one must know more than just the reading, writing, and arithmetic in order to function in a specific society or culture. And what the book basically talked about was the American culture. For example, can you pick up a newspaper and fully understand stories regardless of whether or not you were fully versed in that subject? You at least had enough of an understanding, whether it's through skilled learning, like taught learning that you would go to school for, or just by picking it up as you went along, through just being a citizen of the certain society or culture. You just picked it up as you went along. And it fascinated me because our genealogical community is a culture, if you think of it that way. And we have our own speak. We have our own methodologies, our own reading, writing, and arithmetic sort of methodologies. We have our own jargon, for example, GPS, EE, NGS, register. And if you think about it, how many times have you ever attended a lecture and the speaker will start spewing out terminology, words, or concepts, and everybody else in the audience gets it except for you? And unfortunately, that ends up probably creating a chasm in what you'll be able to get out of that lecture or be able to advance your genealogical skills. So that's kind of the foundation as to where this lecture came from. So it's all about what every genealogist should know. And it will probably be review for many of you. But what it is think about it this way. Think of it as each and every little methodology, concept, or skill or terminology is a dot. And eventually, all of those dots will become a Jackson Pollock of your research sort of skill set so that you can work on your genealogy. But what if you look at it from a different way? This way, it's a beautiful Jackson Pollock painting, but you turn the plane and none of those dots are connecting. So today I'm hoping to give you the glue to connect all of the dots this way, to create the glue with all the different dots this way. So that's the genesis of this, and I hope you enjoy this lecture. So understanding genealogical literacy. Well, genealogy is the second most popular hobby in the United States. According to Family Search's statistics on their webpage, 13.7 million registered users are a part of the Family Search community. They get over 7 million page views per day. Ancestry.com has over 3 million plus paying subscribers, and over 20 million have participated in their DNA test program. The New England Historic Genealogical Society, from their fiscal year 2020 annual report, had over 30,000 individual participants in their programs in fiscal year 2020. However, just with that right there, the genealogical community, when you look at it visually at either conferences, institutes, or genealogical societies, is definitely showing visually much smaller than that. Could there be an actual learning chasm between what people know, what people should know, and how to apply that knowledge? Well, hopefully we can minimize that chasm. So Genealogy 101, what are some of the basics you should know? Well, what's great is we have some wonderful research guides that will help guide you along the way. We have the Red Book. The Red Book is wonderful because what it does is it breaks down with the different jurisdictions here in America. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm using America or New England as our test cases. So those of you that are coming to us tonight from beyond New England, just know that I started and I'm using New England as our sort of smaller subset of a case study, and then America as our larger subset. So the Red Book has, for example, Massachusetts and then the various counties. It has all of the 50 states, but it'll take, for example, the state, counties, and what's available at each of those levels. The source goes through, and it's a book about sources. It'll tell you everything you want to know about land records or probate records or the vital records. The Researcher's Guide to American Genealogy kind of has a morphing of both of those two books, but it talks about some of the research methodologies and how-tos, or methodologies like the Genealogical Proof Standard. Evidence Explained is a great way to show how you can document and cite all of the sources that you look at. Because remember, just like in high school, you have to cite your sources in order for your conclusions to be credible. At the local level, there are local resource guides. These are 3 guides that deal with New England. And then you have certain specific research guides. You have like the Genealogist Handbook for Iris Research or other states. You have also other ethnicities like African American, or you even have official research guides that are official books that are put out by the government themselves. And that is acting in an authority. You also must understand that the way that words have been defined over the last generally 400 years and beyond, especially if you're doing research in Europe, have changed. So having a definition that's the exact definition for the exact time frame you are looking in is a really important thing when it comes to understanding those records. For example, a land record in 1776 that said that this land was being conveyed in a demised state does not mean that it was in a decrepit demised state. It means that it was in a sort of lease of perpetuity. And there were conditions to that lease. And it could be reverted back if the person that it was conveyed to did not uphold those conditions. So you have to understand the exact vernacular. So having dictionaries from that exact time frame or historical dictionaries helps a lot in extracting as much data as you can from these records. The genealogical proof standard, or the GPS as we know, it is a cycle and it's really a measurement. Some people think that it's a process, but in actuality, what you're doing is you are having, yes, a process that takes you along the way to make sure that you are looking at the best sources to try to get the best conclusions that you can make in your research. You start with a research plan. You create a focused research question. So that means that you would not start out with, just do my genealogy and thank you very much and call it a day. What's a focused research question is, I would like to work on this one relative, this one ancestor, and find out who the parents are of this ancestor. And the parents of this ancestor, and you want to put a qualifier to this ancestor that maybe he or she is the spouse of X, or maybe the parent of X or Y. You want to conduct a reasonably exhaustive research. That means that you want to have a comprehensive review of a lot of records. You want to analyze those records. You want to make sure that you look at everything, you corroborate with multiple records, that you also look at it from a comprehensive look of, are things actually matching? Or if there are conflicts, figuring out, is this conflict an issue? Or is it just as simple as the daughter-in-law on a death record didn't have the exact year and that she was off by 2 years? You want to formulate a reasonably sound written conclusion based on the evidence that you find from the sources. And of course, those sources are the best sources that you can find. So for example, if you can find a vital record that was done at the time of the event certified by either a county clerk or a family physician, versus like a mug book that was done 200 years later, chances are the vital record will give you better information than the mug book that was done 200 years later from people that weren't even there. So creating a research plan, this is where you actually start with what you know. You then apply your research question to what you know. And then you figure out what sources are available. You go to your locality guides. Those could be those lovely resource books that we talked about. You want to note any resources that might be lost or destroyed. You want to amend your research plan as your research progresses, because the research plan, it's just kind of a guide. But the thing is as you go through your research, you are going to have some turns along the way, but it can still be your compass along the way too. And of course, we want to look for some traditional methodologies and some tales of caution. One, a child cannot be born before his or her parents were born. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen this. A child cannot be born well after the mother has died. Now, I do want to put a qualifier. There are now some scientific advances in 2021 and 2022 that make this now a little bit grayer, but still, there is still a limitation on this, even with science. But traditionally, we're talking pre-scientific standards. You cannot be in two places at the same time. Now, I have tried and it doesn't work out. You also cannot have two non-twin siblings that can have a birthday within 8 months of each other. Again, pending some newer contemporary scientific advances. Not everything is online, and you need to think phonetically. And when I've worked with, whether it's a client or someone at like the DAR, someone at the Mayflower, someone when I was working the desk at NEHGS, you have no idea how much people would say, it's spelled wrong. This isn't my guy. Spelling doesn't count. You got to think of how it sounds. The other concept that I find that people have a hard time with is the definition of a maiden name. It's the name that a woman is born with. And generally, it's the name of the father. Now, it could be, especially with children out of wedlock, you might see the woman's mother's maiden name. But generally, it's the woman's father is the surname. You should also practice reading and writing cursive writing. Now, this may seem simple, but you'd be amazed how we are losing this skill every day. How many of you can read shorthand? How many of you, your parents could read shorthand? Well, this is a dying art. For many years, I know my kids, they weren't being taught cursive writing in school. I did not know that until I had one of my kids, they had just turned 18 and they needed to do a signature. They were 18 years old and I did not realize that they could not write their own signature. You'd be amazed how quickly they spent the summer school in cursive handwriting that year. Abbreviations. Now, one of the things that happens is just like in any sort of community, you have abbreviations. One of the first things people say is EE. Well, EE is based on evidence explained. It's a style of citations, just like Chicago Manual of Style or other like house styles. SLIG, GRIP, IGHR, GenFed. Those are all week-long genealogical institutes. Many of them pre-COVID used to be in person. Now many of them have turned virtual. NARA, this is another one that people, when you talk about historical records and generally like military records, now NARA has a lot more than military, but it's the National Archives and Records Administration. That's, the nice big building down on Constitution Ave, where the Constitution and the Declaration of Rights, the Declaration of Independence are. But did you know that there are national archives all over the country? And we have one here in Waltham, Massachusetts. The Library of Congress. There's a wealth of information at the Library of Congress. NGS is the National Genealogical Society. NERC is the New England Regional Genealogical Consortium. Every 2 years, they have a conference, and there's one coming up next year. You'll start hearing in your genealogical societies a lot about that as we get closer to the conference. And these are just a few, but I thought it was a great beginning to at least talk about the abbreviations that we all use every day, and we forget that there might be people who may not know what those abbreviations are. Brick walls. Brick walls are something when you basically, in your research, when you cannot advance anymore. They happen when the records stop providing the direct answer. Now, sometimes you can break through it by perseverance. Sometimes you have to go under, over to the side, and sometimes you just have to go to Mars and back in order to figure out how to break them. But don't let it deter you from trying to break down those brick walls. Too many times I see that this is where people stop. Don't stop. Just put it away for a while and then come back to it, and you'd be surprised how much more you know. Genealogical evidence. There are 3 main types of evidence that genealogists use. That's direct, indirect, and negative. Now, direct are basically when records tell the answer all by itself. In a death record, it directly will tell you when a person died. Indirectly, if it actually has, let's say that the name is Mrs. Jane Doe, indirectly, that tells you that that woman could possibly have been married. So I'd be looking at other information if the death record was silent on other factors. A negative evidence is actually not that it's the absence, not that it's a negative search. So for example, you look at Jane Doe in the Alabama state death records and she doesn't show up. That's a negative search. However, if you know that Jane Doe has lived in that county for her whole entire life and she does not show up in that county her whole entire life in a census record, then that's negative evidence. That tells you that something is going on that you need to look at. So you want to kind of go deeper and figure out, well, this chasm. Oh, well, the chasm is that she was actually listed in this household. And then when you go and you look, you figure out, oh, well, negative evidence will explain the chasm in the hole. It's kind of like a black hole. You know that there's a black hole and an absence of information, but generally there's a reason why there's an absence of information. Maybe it's because there was a fire or that record book was lost. And it might hold true that that's why it's there. And remember, evidence is only evidence when we apply it to the research question. DNA. Now there's 3 types of DNA tests: autosomal, Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA. And these are the 3 that we generally use. Online, they have online account portals. They have cousin matches. There's health information, chromosomal mapping, and then also there's other tools that'll help along the way. There are third-party tools, and those will help as well. Just know that DNA tells all. It tells all about the skeletons in everyone's closet. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that just because you have taken a DNA test does not mean that other people want certain things out there. It is all about respect. We are a closed community. We also have friends and family that still want to be able to, have us come for Thanksgiving dinner and family reunions without worrying about all the skeletons. So you want to be mindful. You could discover that you've got relatives that had an out-of-wedlock child. You could discover that you have all of a sudden a brand new brother or sister, or a child you had no idea about. So you want to be respectful of that as well, because what goes around is also what comes around for respect. So make sure also that if you are going to take a DNA test, you also have to take the good and the bad. I would say that, there's a lot of experts out there that can do some counseling as well. So if you do find something that is unusual, don't be afraid to ask advice as well, because a lot of that is hard to understand, the DNA. But if you do understand it, you can also advance your research in amazing ways. So don't let the whole skeletons in the closet deter you either. The fan club. The fan club basically stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. Today, all of you are part of my fan club, and I am a part of your fan club. And these could be family members, sponsors on a baptismal record, abutters on a land record. You'd be amazed when you think about it. They could be witnesses on a court case. They could be a next friend or a trustee to a guardianship. So you want to look at that. You could also see a fan club on military pensions, when all of the people that are in a regiment all vouch for the other one when it comes to pensions. And you'll see it'll almost become a circuit of the same group of people. You might see the same 10 or so families go from one location to another location because they all intermarry. So you see that. That's part of a fan club. So what are some types of genealogical reports? You have the register style, which was sort of based off of the New England Historic Genealogical style that they started back in the late 1800s. Narrative reports, that's where you get to have some wonderful storytelling. Include the stories. Make these two-dimensional names turn into three-dimensional people through narrative reports. Descendancy reports, that's where you take one common ancestor, go down through the all of the descendants of that one person. And Ahnentafel. Now, this is the one that really confuses people the most. You start with yourself and your father, you are one. Your father is 2, your mother is 3. Your father's father 4, father's mother 5, and you keep going. And every single one of the grandparents has a specific number. And every generation, you can tell the generations based on those numbers. It's a little complicated when you think about it, but when you first hear about it. But once you see it in action and play with it, and many of like the Family Tree Maker software programs end up doing these reports for you. Play around with it because it really does help you organize your research, especially if you're doing it for a family reunion and things like that. Family tree software programs. Now, many of these are on your computer. Many of these could even be in the cloud. This is just a small sampling of them. And what's great is each of them has different things that cater to different people. So for example, Family Tree Maker, you can have for both a Mac and PC. Reunion, you can only have for a Mac. Some people like the way that Family Tree Maker works. For example, there's a huge following that people love RootsWeb because of the way it really worked and some of the tools that it had. Each of the tools are specific, like some of them interact better with Family Search's community tree. Some of them work better with the wiki trees. Some of them work better with the ancestry tree and things like that. So figure out what your wants and likes are, and then you'll figure out what program works best for you. The other thing I also suggest is, now my family, I'm a professional genealogist. Now my family did not sign up to be a professional genealogist. So I have respected their wishes and I do not have my trees up on any sort of platform. So I like to keep my trees on my computer. So you may find too, it depends on what you want for sharing. There are people that want their information all out there because the more information they put out there, the more information they get back as positive feedback from other like cousins. So this is where you also want to find out what your comfort zone is, because again, this is data. This is data for your family, but there could be huge returns as well. So I just like to show that there's a little bit of, there's differences with all of these different platforms. Now, I'm going to now kind of go into understanding New England records. Now, I know that we have people here that are from outside New England, but New England is a really important test case. Now, when I work with people who are outside of New England and I talk about New England records, you'd be surprised as to how many people hyperventilate because New England records are so complex and complicated. Raise your hand and you can use your reaction button, like the smiley face, you know, use your hand to like raise your hand or put the thumbs up if you've ever been in that case where to understand New England records took you a little while. Well, it happens all the time. So what I like to do is I like to kind of go through a little bit of turning chaos into order. And this will work on no matter the jurisdiction that you are working on. Because when you first get to a jurisdiction and you're researching that jurisdiction for the first time, what ends up happening is it's new to you. It's just as foreign to you as it is to someone that's outside of New England looking into New England. So it could be complex to you, but it's simple to the people who have been researching there for 30 years. So I always like to start with this slide because it doesn't matter the jurisdiction. Because again, It's all relative to whether or not you're researching there for the first time. So no matter the jurisdiction, you have to know what type of record you are looking for, who is the record for, where did the event occur, when did the event occur, and where is the record now? Because the record may have been listed as a different town, but it's now held somewhere else. And I'll explain why. So here in New England, we have different jurisdictions. We have state, county, district, town/city, village/neighborhoods, and then we have post office zip codes. And within each of these jurisdictions, we have different record sets available for the various jurisdictions. Now, at the town or city level, this is where in New England, for the most part, you will be spending most of your time, except if you are in Connecticut or Vermont. They have slightly different styles, and I'll showcase that also in a minute. But at the town or city hall, you're going to have, for the most part, your vital records, your birth, death, and marriage records. There'll be other records that I've highlighted here, but for the most part, the vital records is really where it's where people spend the most time. The other records are all great because it does help create a full picture when you are researching. And if you're trying to research a brick wall, you never know where these other records will come into play and help with either a timeline, will help solidify whether or not you're looking at one individual, two individuals, or four individuals of the same name in the same town, all about the same age, they're cousins. Because you could have multiple people living in the same small town. Either they're not related or they're all cousins. And each of them could be junior 1, 2, 3, 4. And that doesn't mean that they are father, son, grandson, great-grandson. It's just junior could be the son of the senior or the number 2 that shows up in records. Number 3 could just be the number 3rd John Smith that shows up in records. So you want to make sure that you have the right identity, and that's where the other records help complete that. You have in Connecticut and Vermont, you have these district courts, and they hold the land and probate records. And generally you'll see the larger towns will be a district, but you might see these smaller towns will have one district, and you might see 4 or 5 of these towns be in one district. You also see that at one point there were 131 districts in Connecticut. Today there are 54. So if you are doing any sort of research in Connecticut, you have to understand that there were also parent and daughter districts. At the county level in New England is where the probate and land records are. You also see the court records for the most part at the county level. At the state level is where you see the state papers, the soldier home records, military records from the colonial wars, even through to the contemporary years. You have a whole host of other records. This here is a picture of the Massachusetts State Archives. And what you're looking at there are the boxes of the mental health hospitals or the insane hospitals that were used in the late 1800s and early 20th century. Thanks to our lovely state of Massachusetts that thinks that those are health records, those are off limits to any and all researcher. Can you imagine being able to touch and open those boxes and the genealogical treasures that are in there? Unfortunately, all of those records are closed off to any researcher because of the interpretation of the laws. So you will actually have stumbling blocks like that. You may find your ancestor in a census record for a mental hospital. And just because they're in a mental hospital does not mean that they were quote unquote insane. They could have had tuberculosis. They could have had a stroke. Back in that time frame, they did not have nursing homes or residential nursing facilities. What did they do? Well, they needed to use the insane hospitals that were kind of an established hospital of the time that could handle such long-term disabilities like that. You have also non-governmental jurisdictions. Now I'm going to take a little bit of Cape Cod. Now, I grew up on Cape Cod, and I'll say, oh, I'm from the Mid-Cape. Well, people would say, Mid-Cape, well, that's not a town. Where's the vital records for the Mid-Cape? Or I say I'm from West Yarmouth. Well, again, there's the town of Yarmouth, but where are the vital records for West Yarmouth? So this is where you may see in letters, in ephemera or journals, various villages or neighborhoods that are not necessarily vital record jurisdictions, but they do make a difference as to where you'll find the records. For example, my father's from Boston, but he's from Dorchester. Not only is he from Dorchester, he's from Savin Hill. Does he say he's from Dorchester or Boston? No, he says he's from Savin Hill. So that is where you'll see things very often in genealogical records, especially if it's the Hope Chest finds. Now, this is where another distinction is that if there are parent and daughter locations. So for example, Maine is a daughter state of Massachusetts. Every jurisdiction has this, where they have parent and daughter jurisdictions. Now, someone's house may not have moved, but because the jurisdictional names have all changed, you will find records in not only one jurisdiction, but possibly 7 jurisdictions. So you want to look out for that. The other thing is you also have, whether it's states, you have that with counties and towns. I did a lovely thing here, a lovely graphic showing Mama, Massachusetts with the daughter, Maine, to a lovely family cemetery of here lies Harlem, Maine / the district of, in the / Massachusetts, 1796 to 1818, mother of China, Maine / Massachusetts. So this is where you can see the provenance of our towns and counties and states as well. So keep that in mind. And that's where that red book comes into play. And it doesn't matter where you are in the jurisdiction. So what are some local repositories? We have our repositories, like for example, the Chelmsford Public Library. That is a repository that you can use and a repository that has a lot of support. You have American Ancestors, New England Historic Genealogical Society. They are in downtown Boston. They are also a family search affiliate library. And I believe, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Chelmsford is a family search affiliate library. Yes, okay. So yes, an affiliate library means that you can view additional records that you cannot view at home on Family Search, which is a great agreement. The Massachusetts State Archives. Now there's a wealth of information at the Massachusetts State Archives, and a lot of their records are on Family Search, which is wonderful. You can view almost all of the records for free. There are date holdbacks. So for example, anything that is pre-1930 is not going to be available. Post-1930 is not going to be available. But you can view pre-1930, except for Boston, on Family Search for vital records. That's birth, death, and marriage records, which is great. Every 5 years, the Massachusetts Registry of Vital Statistics transfers over to the state archives blocks of 5 years of vital records. So right now, we can now view up to 1930 on Family Search, which is great. The Daughters of the American Revolution Library down in Washington, D.C. They're also a Family Search library, and they have a wonderful database, all for free. In addition to their database, they have a lot of resources. And I do have a separate talk on how to use the DAR database, but I want you to pay close attention to this one right here. These are the Works Projects Administration books and the Workers of the Writers Project program. These books are done on many counties throughout all of the 50 states. There are many jurisdictions that are no longer available because, like, for example, if courthouses burn down, but indexes or abstracts are in these books. I highly suggest that you look at this database. It is well worth it, especially if you have any Southern research, Maine research, anywhere that had any sort of a fire. So if you look in the Red Book and it says records in this county burned in a fire and it was after the Works Project Administration ended, chances are there might be information in these WPA books. So some of the resources that we go through. So what I'd like to do is there are different levels of resources. There are original records, derivative records, and authored works. Original records are records that's the source, the original birth record in the original way that it was created. A derivative could be a transcribed version of that original birth record. And then an authored work would be you're doing your genealogy and you've entered in the information of that birth record into your narrative or used something in a published work. So some of the compiled records that we have are great, especially if you're doing any sort of Mayflower or New England research. You have, and this will be kind of from chronologically from sort of the beginning of our New England records onward. The silver books, which are the Mayflower books, the first 5 and sometimes up to the first 7 generations, depending on the ancestor. You have the works in progress books. Many of these are being redone, so they're becoming more and more obsolete and being replaced with fresh, newly published silver books. You have the Mayflower Descendant, which was originally published by the Massachusetts Society of Mayflower Descendants. It's now published by the New England Historic Genealogical Society. You have peer-reviewed journals. You've got the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, the Essex Antiquarian, the Maine Genealogist, the Nutmegger, and a whole host of others. You have Bob Anderson's The Great Migration Project. These are the first generation of the peopling of New England from England and Anglo-Saxon jurisdictions. And what he did is he wanted to catalog all of the New England immigrants that came over between the specific dates of 1620 and 1640. And it's a pretty comprehensive list of those first families. You have the Winthrop fleet families, and it's the names compiled from all of the known Winthrop papers. You have also, if you have any early colonial Boston records or families, Boston can be a real difficult place to research if you're doing it really pre-1800. The records are spotty at best. And there's a great collection on the New England Historic Genealogical Society called the Thwing, Thwing collection. And it's based on these early Boston landowners. And it is a great and highly underused collection. If you're doing any Connecticut research, you have the Barber collection, which is an index of vital records for the various Connecticut towns. And it'll tell you exactly how it compiled it, the families. Again, it is compiled from various resources. So you still want to go look at the original, but it'll tell you the volume and the page of where the originals came from. If you're doing any research in either Connecticut, Western Massachusetts, Eastern upstate New York, or Southern Vermont, these 3 collections are definitely for you. These collections are on microfilm through the Family Search catalog, but probably one of the best finding aids NEHGS has on their microfilm floor. So if you're having trouble with some of the indexes on Family Search, I would recommend that you go to NEHGS and get help and look at some of those finding aids. Massachusetts Vital Records to 1850 is this collection of about, it's over, I think it's like over 200 volumes. Not every town participated in this project, but the state of Massachusetts and the Secretary of State that dealt with vital records in the early 20th century, they were getting so sick and tired of dealing with all of the vital record requests for the DAR and everyone wanting to join the DAR. They realized, okay, we're going to put a stop to it. We are going to publish this series of books that will put everybody all on the same page. We'll get it out to the various libraries. And that way, they aren't going to have to bother us anymore. Now, yes, many of these books are online. Not all of them are. So my advice is to definitely look within the various libraries to see which libraries has the books that you need. So just know that if you're not finding them on Ancestry.com, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. I believe on the Secretary of State's website, there's a full listing of all of the books that were done. Now, I was a crazy fool last year. I actually ended up getting, a library was getting rid of them. And I said, I'll take them. So my husband, who loves me very much, went with me to get the whole collection. And I have now about a 90% of this collection, which is a really important thing because, again, these are not online. And in some cases, this is all that's left. When I look at, I live in Leominster, Massachusetts, and there was a fire in the 1920s in Leominster. The town hall burned down. When you go and look for, when you go to the town clerk's office and you say, I'd like a record from this time frame, they say, you see that building across the street? It's the library. They have a book over there, the Vital Record to 1850 of the Leominster Vital Records. That's what we have. That is their authoritative source, is that book. So of course, I know I can get better records on Family Search, but when you go there and asking for a certified copy, that's what they're going to tell you. So just so you know, there are some towns that it still happens in. The Massachusetts Vital Records, they have also a series of indexes. And it's really important for you guys to understand these indexes. How many of you have seen these on Ancestry.com? These indexes, they're for births, deaths, and marriage records. There is a group of the 1950s that are not online. Those indexes are on these, they're in these books that are kind of on this computer paper that they're not the best to really use. And they haven't really digitized those. These are in bound versions, in bound volumes. And usually you see them on top of the counters and microfilms boxes at NAHGS. These are really important, but what they are, when people say, well, it's the volume and page number, that volume and page number is for the state return. Here in Massachusetts, vital records are held in two places, at the town at the town level or city level, but also there is a copy that goes to the state. So this index that you are seeing online is the index for the state return. So what you have to do is when you're looking at indexes, look at the fine print of the index. Is it the fine print of the state record, or is it the fine print for the town or the local level record? And this is where I love those first few pages of the information of any published volume and bound volume. Sometimes Ancestry takes away those pages in the searches, even if you go to image 1 of like 5092. Sometimes you can get the full microfilm on Family Search. So use databases too, and online repositories off of one another to hopefully give you more provenance of the information contained within the film strip, database, or volume. This is Torrey's New England Marriages prior to 1700. Clarence Elman Torrey he ended up going through again all of these records to compile a whole volume. And in here, it's really hard to tell. But what he did was, for example, this record here of Richard Giles and Hannah Churchill, he found all of these various records and the volumes. Like, for example, this was in Dunham, page 11. Looks like Haverhill, page 2. This was, let's see, Mayflower Descendant, volume 30, page 142 and 185. So this is where you have to look at his key. Whether it's Bob Anderson, Torrey, or the Mass Vital Records to 1850, or even the Barber Collection. If you look in the beginning of the book, there's a key to all of the abbreviations. Don't skip over that key. That'll tell you whether or not it's a church record, a vital record, a tombstone record. It'll tell you where they got the information from. So don't skip over those abbreviations. Those abbreviations are actually telling you the source and the citation. So this is my favorite part of what are some of the typical records. Now, we all know about vital records, and we all know about, you know, sort of that so-and-so was born on this day and so-and-so was married on this day. Well, did you know that there were actual laws that tell exactly what the requirements of each of those records are? You know, and you know about census records. And you guys all know that the 1950 census is all out. Just making sure. There's court records. I love the early New England court records. That's where you'll find a lot of the bastard cases. And you'll find really the connection to a lot of those maiden names. You have land records that are person to person, but then there's the proprietor records. Now, the proprietor records are when it's going from the overall, for example, you've got in the beginning here, you have the earliest from the Native Americans to the crown, or from the colony, the Native Americans to the colony. You have the crown to the sort of to the people, like the people that were actually the colony governors. You have the royal grants, the colonial grants, or even the town or proprietary grants. You see this more in Connecticut and Vermont as they went through and they were settling those states. How many of you go for New England maritime records? You know, New England was the maritime powerhouse, the global powerhouse up until the Civil War. You have no idea how many times I work with people and it's like, well, have you thought about looking at a maritime record? And people are like, well, they weren't a sailor. I'm like, well, chances are they had something to do with sailing. If they lived here in Massachusetts, Maine, or Rhode Island, that was what the powerhouses were. So you have to look at that. And there's a treasure trove of records. Manuscripts. There are so many repositories, private and public, that have manuscript collections. Now, I want to talk a little bit about military records. There are military records that go all the way back to the first settling, the first, even pre-Anglo-Saxon, going back even before the Mayflower got here to the early explorers, you know, from whether it's up in Atlantic Canada or even down in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's a wealth of records for that as well. So you want to make sure that you add historical context, because chances are, and you're going to see in a second, the reason why you should really be looking at the military conflicts to help drive your genealogy. One, you get great records like muster rolls and military pensions that provide a lot of details. But look at this timeline. I just did the timeline from the early 1600s and all of the wars. And it seems like us North American, Anglo-Saxon in general, Anglo-Saxon, you know, immigrants here to the New World, we just can't seem to get along. As we go through, it's just like every couple of years, there seems to be some sort of war or conflict, even to Operation Enduring Sentinel. Now, it's lovely is Ancestry.com has this wonderful chart. And what it does is it kind of breaks down the various big wars. And it says the estimated birth years. This is a direct link to this slide. This should be printed and posted on every one of your walls because it will really help you understand when people could possibly be born. You also have a lot of the records of the native nations. Now, here in the New England area, there's a huge history dating back to the early 1600s of some of these records. You also see it in Atlantic Canada as well, of like Nova Scotia with the Mi'kmaq up there as well. And there's a lot of records. You see it with the Wampanoags, you see it with the Nipmucks, the Nausets, all of them. Now, what's interesting is there are many of these that are held at the State Archives of Massachusetts, if they are Massachusetts tribes. Newspapers. Remember, newspapers are more than just obituaries. They could be social, the social pages. Like, for example, you know, Mrs. John Doe went up to visit her sick grandmother in Ithaca, New York. And, you know, it might even name the sick grandmother. Which would be great if you're trying to prove that. You got to love those juicy divorce matters and other juicy court records. And the other thing too is there's a lot of online genealogical databases, one of which is FamilySearch.org. Now, FamilySearch.org is free. Many of the other databases are paid. What I want to introduce you to are the Family Search wiki pages. What's wonderful are these are great locality or topical guides that'll help you discover even more records, more than you even knew about. Because remember, what you don't know about until you know it. Well, you don't know what to look for until you have tools that help you find it. And these are a wonderful way to do that. And again, it's for free. You can also use their catalog. Their catalog will help you go right to the sources. Now, the default is place, but look at all of these other, just like a card catalog that we all learned back in school. And if you plug in, for example, United States, Massachusetts, you'll get all of the records that they have, all of the record collections that are held at the Massachusetts state jurisdictional level. And what's great is that, for example, here, this is the one time that you want to see a pop-up window. Now this Family Bible Records of Swift River Valley Historical Society, New Salem, Massachusetts. Now, if you look here, oh, hold on, let me, I can't really do this right now. There'd be either a little film strip camera or a camera with a lock on it. If it's a camera, it means that you can view it. If it's a camera with a key, that means that it's a locked record. What'll happen is that this is when I want you to click on that record or click on that camera, like the camera with a lock on it. Click on it because it's going to tell you whether or not that record is viewable at a family history center or a family search affiliate library. And guess what? If it looks like this, you can go right to the Chelmsford Library and you can view it at the Chelmsford Public Library. If you're elsewhere, you can actually chime in elsewhere and they have affiliate libraries all over the world. Archives.gov is another one. That is the National Archives. They have some wonderful digitized collections there. Archive.org has a lot of great books on there that you can open source to books. And they have this wonderful thing called the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine is great. If there's a website that is no longer running, but it was cataloged by the Wayback Machine, you can view a static version of that website. So a website that went static 3 years ago, that went and just maybe somebody, an organization didn't continue paying their WordPress payments, but it was cataloged. You can see it and you'll be able to get that information. Don't forget about books on Google Books. Library of Congress has a wonderful website. Anything that the government has, whether it's on archives.gov, Library of Congress, or this other wonderful website called A Century of Lawmaking for a New Nation, guess what? It is out of copyright and you can use it with proper crediting. And it'll tell you exactly how you're supposed to credit it. There's maps, there's westward migration maps that'll help about the settling and the westward migration and migration patterns. Steve Morse and David Rumsey have great websites with maps. And there are so many other things. The Massachusetts State Archives has this great colonial collection, all online for free on Family Search. You'll find a whole host of things here. And then there's another whole thing, which is there's a collection here that not a lot of people know about, but if you're looking at privateers, there's a collection at Harvard Library that has been digitized. They have some wonderful privateering records. And again, remember, Massachusetts was the epicenter of the maritime world. So if there's one takeaway I want you to come away with is definitely to start thinking maritime before anything else, because if it's pre-Civil War, you may actually have a better result with your research about the maritime. And I know there's so many more things that we could go over because again, this is just to like come to an understanding of a genealogical literacy so everyone here can start being, can have a better understanding and advance their research and really deepen their knowledge and put it all together and know it's not just about the glue and not about the dots, this skill, that element, this concept, this methodology, but it's how you connect all the dots to show that it's all interconnected. And I hope this helps give you a better understanding, and I hope it does actually deepen, I hope it actually advances your research to at least put everyone on the same playing field. So the next time that you have a lecture or attend a lecture, you'll kind of have a little bit of an idea as to what it all means. And I hope you all have a little bit more confidence to, expand your genealogical ancestry trees.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
Jan, you want to say anything?
No, I'm overwhelmed, but it was wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. There's just so much to think about, and I've appreciated your time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.